Hi, I'm Gabrielius Landsbergis, and this is the first conversation in a series of podcasts called Escalation. Today, we are honored to have with us Vytis Jurkonis, a scholar, activist, and one of the leading voices on democracy and human rights in Eastern Europe. Vytis is a project director working at Freedom House, focusing on Belarus, Russia, and the broader implications of authoritarian aggression. His efforts to support and battle democracies amplify the voices of activists and provide critical insights into frontline countries make him a vital figure in understanding the challenges we face today. I will start with a story that I think that, at least for me personally, depicts the place or the role Vytis plays in the non-governmental sector, or to all the dissidents that found their place in Lithuania, home away from home. So a couple of years back, when it was, I would say, that the height of people moving into Lithuania from Belarus, from Russia, definitely from Ukraine, I was walking down the street in the old town of Vilnius, and a Russian speaker person approached me, addressed me as a minister, and asked me whether I can get in touch with Vytis Jurkonis. I said, yeah, sure. I mean, I know Vytis for more than a decade. And I said, what's the problem? Why would you need to ask me that in the middle of the street? And he says, look, I'm here in Lithuania. I need to get back to Belarus for some personal matter, and I'm worried that I won't be able to return to Lithuania. So I need somebody to walk me through the process, how it will be. And the funny part is, so you have a minister of foreign affairs, walking in the old town, a person who is in charge of embassies, consulates, consular departments, whatnot, being able probably to some extent to answer the questions that you're interested in. But yet, you choose to ask for a connection to Vytis Jurkonis. So for me, it tells how important and how central a figure you are for those people who, who are forced, I would use that word, who are forced to stay in Lithuania, to hide from the regimes further to the east. First of all, currently, what is the situation? I know that there are probably hundreds or even thousands of people who ran away from their countries in Belarus and Russia and chose Lithuania to stay. How is the situation currently? How many people, are you in contact with? And are we still seeing the same situation happening? Are they still coming in?
Thank you, Gabrielius, for your kind words and introduction, and for the invite. And for the work that you were doing as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Indeed, Lithuania is a hub for the Democrats, human rights defenders, dissidents from Eastern Europe, mainly like from Belarus, but also you mentioned Russia. There are a few other nationalities here. But if we talk about Belarus, since the protests of 2020, I believe Lithuania became a shelter place for thousands of Belarusian activists, independent media, cultural workers, and gender initiatives, you name it. I mean, it's the entire spectrum of the civil society. Lithuania was among the very first countries to respond to the atrocities of Belarusian regime, opened up the humanitarian corridor, issued the visas, then later on invented the mechanism of the so-called humanitarian residence permits, so that people are not necessarily pushed to apply for asylum process. So at the moment, the numbers that Lithuania is a place for almost 60,000 Belarusians. Not all of them are actually dissidents and those who fled because of the repressions, but I think that somewhat an estimate of 10,000 people are one way or another related to the protests, and those who cannot return back because they face possible repression at home.
Vytis, can you run us through, as much as it's possible, a story that would normally transpire, under your supervision, let's say? How does it happen? Does it start in Minsk? Does it start in Moscow? Does it start on the border? Do you receive a phone call? Lead us through the process, if you can.
Yeah. So one question, like very ordinary one that I would usually receive from international human rights defenders or foreign policy makers, people would ask, why Lithuania, right? So of course you can simply narrow it down to the geographical proximity, but it's more than that. I think that that's also some sort of political will of Lithuania to assist I think that this historical, not only geographical, but historical, cultural proximity is also there because of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, but also the people-to-people. I remember that, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, some of the people would come to Vilnius, some of the Belarusians would come to Vilnius to have a coffee in freedom and in democratic society. Now it's not possible because of the ongoing terror in Belarus, all sorts of sanctions there. But the usual process, how it works, it's not only because of the political will of Lithuania, though it's very important, not only because of what we do as the human rights defenders community, but also what Belarusian human rights defenders community and civil society is doing. So usually they are the ones who are raising the flag, saying that either Peter, Sasha, or Masha is in trouble, he or she needs to flee immediately because tomorrow, the police might enter the doors and the person might go into jail. Or let's say a former political prisoner is released because he or she served the sentence, and then the human rights defenders from Belarus would call and say, he or she needs a visa because the repressions, even after the release of this political prisoner, is not going to end. And then we are approaching Lithuanian authorities asking to provide the Schengen visa. The person comes to Lithuania as discreetly as possible, and then you discuss with him or his or her plans, whether it's issue of few months, a year, because there are very different, it's the entire diversity. Some people cannot leave for good because they have their elderly parents who are sick and they cannot leave their homes. But especially because of this upcoming sham re-election process in Belarus, which is at the end of January. Now, for the last 2-3 months, we see an uptick of the repressions. The Belarusian regime is trying to completely wipe out any disagreement, any criticism, any activism. And therefore, we have been noticing an uptick of the repressions. And some people were leaving for 2-3 months just to not be present in Belarus because they know that it means jail time for them.
I would have a question here because you've mentioned, I don't even know how to call it. I mean, the process, what is referred by the regime as election, but we know that there's no democracy, happening there. First of all, why do you think that it was made earlier? Why it is so important for Lukashenko to have it now? Do you envisage any shift in his methods, let's say, afterwards? There's no illusion, right, about the regime itself. But, do you think that he would try and use this as a momentum, to get, to some sort of a normalization with the Baltics or with the West or with somebody?
Well, I believe the regime is already trying that, and I wouldn't be surprised that we would see some sort of new releases of the former political prisoners, because it has been in the playbook a decade ago, right? That's what the regime was doing before, trying to free political prisoners as political hostages, right? We released some. You do lift the sanctions, and I think that there's no coincidence that the regime is organizing their sham elections late January. I think it's the time which also aligns with the coming back to the office of Donald Trump and the new U.S. administration. I think that the regime is trying to is monitoring what is happening in the world, and they hope for the new window of opportunity here. At the same time, I think let's not make any mistakes, and I think that the Belarusian democratic forces are very consistent in that. We should not be recognizing this. There's no legitimacy whatsoever. The things that happened in 2020 have not changed. In fact, the terror is only increasing. Yeah. There's also the participation of the full-scale invasion of Belarus. So I think that it all it only calls for like determination and a much more fierce stand towards Belarus and the Belarusian regime. Because, let's also say this. If we talk about the upcoming U.S. administration, you remember that Pompeo was visiting Belarus in early 2020, just before the sham elections in 2020. Yeah. I think that was a mistake, also a slap in the face to the Donald Trump's administration back then, and the situation changed in August 2020. The deputy of Mr. Pompeo, like Steve Biegun, came to Lithuania, met with Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya. So I think that that's an opportunity for us to kind of urge to not turn the page and say, hey, let's be as tough as possible to the Belarusian regime, because one, Vladimir Putin is watching too. Well, let's admit that Lukashenko and his regime is not the toughest, not the most resourceful of all, and the costs of being tough towards them are relatively low. So I would call the upcoming U.S. administration to go the full force against the Belarusian regime, and also send a signal to Vladimir Putin and also to Beijing. The new administration is back, and that's what the peace through strength means. Yes, that's basically should be our message, our signal to the autocrats in this region. And
look, I have a question here. Usually asked during conferences and whenever I meet officials from other countries, how do we deal with Lukashenko if he comes offering gifts, right? If he suggests that he will release, political prisoners, reduce the pressure inside, maybe allow us to establish, one or the other organization and, kind of offer this normalization. I would remind them about how many times this has happened in the past, because the democratic process, it provides a problem, right? Because, we are in these 4-year cycles. So in some cases, we have a very short historic memory. We don't remember what happened in 2012. We don't remember what happened in 2007 or something like that. But you have a very good vantage point in this, right? Being, from an NGO, working part of your, a big part of your professional life with, Belarusian human rights activists and, just observing the political sphere there. So can you tell us, what would be your message in this? So kind of that this is not new, right?
No, absolutely not. It's not new. And I think that we need to learn the lessons of the past, and any good negotiator, before going to negotiations, you are preparing as much as possible, learning from the mistakes of the past, talking to different stakeholders. And I think in this regard, obviously, authoritarian leaders have some sort of advantage because they are in power for a decade or two, or three for that matter, right? Meanwhile, the democratic governments are changing. There are new people coming in. They think that the others were too weak or indecisive whatsoever. So in this regard, plus the diplomats, the foreign policy makers, they are shifting. There's a rotation, you were dealing with Belarus. Tomorrow you will be dealing with Turkey. Then you're going to European Union, for instance, to Brussels, right? So in this regard, I think that something cooperation and coordination with the civil society, human rights defenders is of utmost importance, because they are basically the institutional memory of what kind of tricks, what's there in the playbook of the authoritarian leaders. And I think that they're for instance, the U.S. government now has this strategic dialogue with the Belarusian Democrats, and I think it's a good step to the right direction. But basically, if I were to start any negotiation with any of the authoritarian leaders, I would establish the task force. I would have consultations with various stakeholders and prepare and do the very same thing, peace through strength. I mean, negotiations through strength. Because, otherwise they would trick us. Again, the authoritarians do lie because they have this sense of impunity. They are not accountable to their people. They are not accountable to the international organizations. and we treat them as if the equal partners. They are not equal partners because they are going to trick you in this regard. Like, we need to come to the negotiation table with full force, exhibiting our full power, and actually standing by the democratic values and the values of freedom and the rule of law. Otherwise, we are putting ourselves in a vulnerable and weak position.
Vytis, you mentioned 2020, and you mentioned Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya. Probably, at least for me, it marks a change in Lithuania that was more or less ad hoc in the questions of accepting dissidents in our country. And from there on, with her arrival, it basically became a trademark of the country, right? So then, we have Navalny's team established in Lithuania, and so many others that joined, seemingly after Svetlana coming in. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that you've been at the root of it. So you were, one of the first people to welcome Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya in Vilnius. Can you tell us a little bit of how did it go? How did it happen? 2020 August. Where were you?
I was in Vilnius 2020 August, but I think there's no secret because Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya told it herself that I was the person who personally met her at the border, and the way it worked, the human rights defenders from Belarus contacted me in June and said there's one candidate who is willing to run until the end, but she's threatened with her kids. And is there any possibility that Lithuania might help? That you might help getting the kids out, because back then we had the pandemic. It was very difficult to travel, and basically Svetlana Tikhanovskaya texted me the secure messenger saying, "Can you help? Can you relocate my kids so that I am able to run till the very end?" So, and Lithuania was supportive of that, and I think that there's also this kind of very important thing. One might say that there's some sort of a legacy. I remember that some of the Russian dissidents were saying, hey, you were sheltering Prince Kurbsky, hiding from Ivan the Terrible, the old believers, and so on and so forth. And we have also our own diplomats in between the First and Second World War. Jurgis Baltrushaitis, who was saving the intellectuals from the Bolshevik terror, right? Mark Chagall, I think that everyone knows him, or Tsvetaeva. So I think that Lithuania has this tradition and also very discreet and hybrid policy. Be tough as hell to the representatives of the regimes, and as much supportive as possible to the Democrats and the freedom fighters. And I believe this is embedded in Lithuanian identity. Support the good guys and be as harsh as possible to the bad guys. So that's basically the reason why I think that Lithuanian foreign policy makers suddenly realized that these two rather different approaches can be compatible, and actually they are not contradicting. This value-oriented policy actually goes in line with the national security as well. So therefore, you have seen Lithuania being super tough regarding sanctions, synchronization of sanctions, be it regarding hijacking of the Ryanair flight, be it the instrumentalized migration, at the same time being very open and express the biggest solidarity with the Belarusian Democrats. And that's partly the reason why Svetlana Tikhanovskaya established the office in Vilnius. And that's also why we have so many independent journalists, human rights defenders, civil society representatives, and they vary. I mean, we have very young folks who are 18 years old or so, and those who used to be the dissidents even in the Soviet Union, those who are coming from Minsk or Moscow or St. Petersburg, but also those who are coming from the regions. So, and I think this is also kind of an investment into the future. These people-to-people contacts, the trust and confidence in each other. And in fact, there's also the other reason that through our contacts with the Belarusian Democrats and with the Russian Democrats, we can improve and we can better understand our neighbors. Because let's admit that the knowledge and understanding of Belarus is relatively low. I mean, I remember that the Belarusian independent experts were saying that 80% of knowledge and experience on Belarus lies in Lithuania and Poland. 80%. And I think that this investment into the people-to-people contacts is providing us with more insight and more nuanced approach regarding what is happening in Belarus. Same goes for Russia. I mean, the problem was that throughout the years of collaboration, with the Russian authorities, our approach to Russia has been increasingly either geopolitical or political. We know Lavrov, we know Vladimir Putin, we know, Alexei Navalny, Vladimir Karamurza, and then we are missing 140 million people, and this is a huge country, with a very different, and when we say Russians, do we also mean Bashkirs? Are we also talking about Tatars and so on and so forth? So I think that the contacts with the civil society, investigative journalists, are enabling us to be much better in terms of sanctioning the bad guys, chasing the bad guys. And in this regard, I think that there's not only a moral argument, but also the argument of having a much more precise policy towards these countries.
I think that you're absolutely right with what you're saying. I had this theory. It might be simplistic, but that Lithuanians have some sort of a freedom DNA. Take into account, whenever there was in 2020, I think it was autumn, so already after the stolen election, you would see Lithuanians everywhere with free Belarus flags. That was a huge movement all the way from the Lithuanian capital to Lithuanian border. People were holding hands, and standing in the human chain, remembering our human chain of 1989. Kind of to support Belarus. Then when you see, events happening in Tbilisi, you will see Georgian flags. I'm not even mentioning Ukraine, where the Ukrainian flags are still in every part of Lithuanian society, towns, villages, whatnot. And, if I'm asked, are Lithuanians pro-Belarusian? Are Lithuanians pro-Ukrainian or pro-Georgian or, what they pro for? And I would say they're pro-freedom because this.
Well, absolutely. Yes. Yes. And you're right. I mean, remember, before 2020, while speaking to my fellows in the academic community, some of them were kind of very pessimistic about the civil society in Lithuania, that it's too passive, that people are not active. And they were saying, well, remember the Baltic Way before the collapse of the Soviet Union? We would never, ever be like that again. And, then Belarus happened and it inspired us. It gave us hope. And we had this Belarus chain going from Vilnius to the Belarus border. And that there were 50,000 people or so, which was amazing, inspiring. So, at the same time, I think this solidarity with freedom fighters, be it in Ukraine, this solidarity shifted slightly. If in 2020 the solidarity was with Belarus, in 2022, ever since, this solidarity is mostly visible with the Ukrainians, right? But at the same time, Belarusians are trying to help Ukrainians as well. And I think that whenever we see this fight for freedom, we are supportive. We are willing to help. And you are certainly right. That's in our DNA, to fight the bad guys and to help the good guys.
So I'd like to move a little bit from Belarus more to Russia. And again, I would start from the dissidents, the groups of people that chose Lithuania as their home away from home. And again, could you tell a little bit about what is today's Russia's opposition? We call Russian opposition, but at least I know at least 4 groups that do not always, and I say that diplomatically, agree with each other. But how do you see them? First of all, what are their goals? How do they cooperate? Whether they do cooperate, how do they see future Russia?
Well, that's a $1 million question, right? On the one hand, everyone wants to see the unity. And I think that all the international community is kind of willing to see joint conference where every Democrat is present at the very same table. I tend to ask that question whether we have the unity of the Republicans and the Democrats in the United States. I mean, whether we have the unity in France, among different parties. So democracy is not about the unity as such. I mean, there are some uniting factors like adherence to democratic norms, to the rule of law, to fundamental freedoms. But at the end of the day, it's also the debate, it's also the discussion, it's also the fight, and it's also, but, the issue is that the Russian Democrats cannot participate in the elections. So I would rather call them dissidents, and we are focusing way too much on the differences, the disagreements, rather than the things that unite them. And what unite them, of course, is the fight and different ways to trying to counter Putin's regime. I think that it's becoming increasingly difficult because Russia is going a very fast way to this Belarus terror state. We have seen Russian civil society being wiped out very fast. While Lukashenko was doing it for decades, basically Vladimir Putin and Kremlin did it within the last 5 years, labeling the civil society foreign agents, organizing these undesirable organizations labels and things like that, pushing basically the entire civil society and the active people underground. Most of the Democrats were forced to flee. Not all of them fled, but basically that's why I would be very cautious, calling them opposition. They are much more like dissidents now. And it reminds of something like the Soviet Union type of situation where you can have your on resistance activities, but publicity inside Russia is not possible now. Otherwise, you are going to end up in jail. So we do have still independent media. Most of them are operating from outside, be it from the Baltic countries, be it from Germany, be it from Poland, be it from Georgia, be it from Netherlands. We have human rights defenders who are still working in the hybrid mode. Some of them are inside, some are outside. We have, unlike in Belarus, because in Belarus we don't have almost none of the lawyers who can defend the oppressed people. In Russia, we still have a solid number of lawyers who are trying to, we understand that there is no rule of law, but they can win some time when the people are oppressed. We have new emerging grassroots initiatives, feminist anti-war initiatives, local initiatives, which are not necessarily visible in Brussels or in Washington or in Berlin, because usually that would be a no-name. And as I've said, that's part of the problem with our radar, because politicians tend to speak to the politicians. And with all respect to Vladimir Karamurza, Khodorkovsky, and other politicians, it's not that they are connected to every single tiny town in Russia. I mean, obviously, they do have contacts, but not with 140 million people. So it's very important to continue the support to the independent media, especially the investigative journalists, because they are basically revealing us the names and the contacts of the bad guys, those who actually live in Europe. And remember that even the downing of this tragedy in 2014 was partly investigated by the investigative journalists from Russia. I mean, the Salisbury attacks, the bombings in Czech Republic, the assassinations in Germany, in UK. I mean, partly that was uncovered with the help of the Russian civil society. So I think that sometimes we are underestimating of what the civil society can do, what it is doing, because our focus is too much focused on the political opposition or political dissidents and their disagreements and their inner fighting. Russia is much bigger and much broader than that.
Well, I would like you to add to that, so how do you evaluate the leaders of the dissident groups, let's call that? How efficient are they? Are they efficient? Well, do they reach the people in Khabarovsk and elsewhere?
Well, we see that the Russian regime is trying to block all the ways and disconnect the dissidents and the independent media, from the ordinary people. I don't think that they are super effective in this, but they have all the cards in their hands. There are all sorts of ways, VPNs and whatnot, to try to continue reaching the audience. And from the numbers that I've seen within the Khodorkovsky media or Navalny media or other independent media, not opposition media, I see that they are managing to sustain a big chunk of their audience inside the country. And we have seen actually when the full-scale invasion started in 2022, one thing what the Kremlin did, they were shutting down immediately. Dosh, we basically shutting the lights and voices. So Kremlin is continuing fighting them. That means there's someone to fight with. At the same time, if we talk about the efficiency of the Democrats, if we are measuring their efficiency by the unity, well, there's some sort of a disappointment, obviously. But I think that we shouldn't be imposing that on them. I think this will come naturally. We have seen efforts to fundraise for the political prisoners, the marathon, and that has been successful, and that has been an expression of unity. We have seen attempts to rally in Berlin or elsewhere to organize joint solidarity actions in Europe, in different cities. That has been an expression of unity. But at the same time, there's a cost. We have seen not only the dissidents being pushed out of the country or pushed underground, but some of them ended up in jail. Some of them were poisoned, killed. So it's not easy. And I think that we need to understand that. At the same time, I think that the solidarity which was there before the full-scale invasion has scaled down because even in Lithuania, especially in Lithuania, I would say the emphasis is on supporting Ukraine. Many would say, why would we waste our energy on Russia or the Russian dissidents? And I understand, but at the same time, there are various international foundations which continue their programming, even despite being labeled as undesirable organizations, criminalized in Russia. And this work continues. We wish it was much more effective, but I think that we also need to understand the limitations which are imposed by the Russian regime there.
Vytis, but here I would like to ask, what you mentioned Lithuania and being a Lithuanian and following the Lithuanian debate, social debate, especially that we're coming out of the election, that was also part of this. It has to do with what I would call the geopolitical version of a chicken and egg debate. So who is to blame? Is it Putin or is it Russia, right? And and there are people, and also in the West, and also among the dissidents, Russian dissidents, who would say, look, it's Putin's war, it's Putin's geopolitical agenda. We have no part in this. But there are those who would say, look, but it feels as if big part of Russia actually mandates its current regime, right? So it's not it's not going against the feeling of the people, right? That the imperial spirit of Russia has not been broken in this, and it's still there, it's lingered. And in some cases, you would see, it's either a word or a sentence or a proclamation here and there, also that you see it within the dissidents. Just to give you an example. When it was, couple of years ago, I think it was Dosh, which would have to leave Latvia because of the programming, the TV program that they did, which actually was seen as a support to the war against Ukraine, and they had to back it basically in days, and then they had to leave. So how do you explain it, and how do you see that? Is there this imperial spirit being brought out of Russia with dissidents in their heart as well, or are they not a part of this? Is it just Putin?
I think it's a difficult question, and which requires a very nuanced answer. The thing is, you are at war, and Ukrainians are at war. You don't want to talk about 50 shades of gray, right? It's white and black. And from that perspective, some of the Democrats are sharing this feeling, saying, we are all complicit. So in this regard, I can say that all Europeans are also complicit. Those who were playing with Vladimir Putin because of Gazprom, because of oil, they are also complicit. Many European companies are complicit as well because they never minded the Crimea annexation and they were circumventing the sanctions. So, there's a bit of a guilt in each of us, We know that even some Ukrainian companies were collaborating with the Russian regime even despite what happened in 2014. So I think that every one of us can find something to feel guilty of. At the same time, the question is, what are we doing now? How are we reacting now? I think in this regard, Lithuania is in a relatively comfortable position because we were very vocal about the Kremlin regime since 2007, since the attack against Estonia, the Bronze Soldier story, the cyber attacks back then Georgia, war in Georgia. But if we come back to the Russian dissidents, we can remind our viewers and listeners of Boris Nemtsov. Boris Nemtsov was organizing anti-war rallies in 2014, and he was shot down and killed nearby Kremlin basically few days before the anti-war action. Where were the Germans, the French? Some of the most vocal Lithuanians, in fact, who are vocal now, where were they in 2014? So, I understand the question, but at the same time, I think it requires some honesty, not only from the Russian activists and dissidents, especially those who were fighting the regime back then, a decade ago. And when you are mentioning the incident with Dosh, for instance, they did a number of mistakes. At the same time, I don't have even doubt that they are purely anti-war, that they are purely anti-Putin. We need to admit that and recognize the fact that we are at the epicenter of the information war. And the Kremlin regime is also interested to discredit everyone who is opposing Kremlin.
Vytis, can I ask you here? So my question would be to you: is it possible, via conversation, to explain the feelings that we have, the way that Ukrainians feel? Explain that to the dissidents so that we would level out a little bit our understanding of where we are. Why there is why do we feel the way we feel?
Well, I'm certain of that. I have participated in a number of heated debates, right? So I think it's not easy. Some of the Russian activists who were fighting Putin's regime feel kind of offended when they are criticized of being not too much supportive of Ukraine, though they are. I don't know, let's bring an example of famous protest musician Noise MC, who actually lives in Lithuania, right? He's very popular in Ukraine. He was very vocal about the, against the Crimea annexation. He is actually from Belgorod, and he was not hiding that for him, Kharkov was much more close for his musician's career than some remote Moscow in this regard. And the moment he came to Lithuania, he started fundraising for the Ukrainian refugees. Organized a number of concerts like Voices of Peace. And yes, he received a lot of hate from the Kremlin, from those who are supporting Kremlin, but also from those who support Ukraine, saying why do you interfere? You are from Russia, you are the reason why Vladimir Putin is in power. So it's not easy, but they understand that. They have been in this environment of hate for a decade, if not more. They are accustomed to that, though I think that it's not pleasant. At the same time, I think what is important for us and Ukrainians, for us Europeans and Ukrainians to understand is that if we pursue this message that democratic Russia is not possible, that simply the Russian society is not designed for the rule of law, I think we are depriving the entire region of hope. And this kind of message to the upcoming US administration would lead to that, let's forget this region, let's focus on China, because this region is never, ever going to change. And I think this is that would be a fundamental mistake. I understand that first and foremost, Ukraine needs support in weapons, in financial assistance, but there are people who are working with the Democrats and with the human rights defenders. And if there's a slight chance, I don't know, 5% chance that Russia might become democratic, someone needs not only to wait or comment on that, but actually work and help the dissidents to make that 5% possibility a 10% possibility, and then eventually happen. And I think that's what the civil society is doing. I would like the foreign policy makers simply not to neglect that hope, and if there's a chance, to support it to the extent possible.
So probably my last question here, I understand that you pointed out that very clearly, that you believe in democratic Russia, that it is possible. And with this, I fully agree with you. But does it start from the people who are in Vilnius? And does it start from people, from the mothers of the soldiers who are getting way more disappointed about, their children returning in black boxes? Where does it start? What is coming from? Or should come from?
First of all, we started with this like that Lithuanians are generally like for freedom, like globally, no matter like where it's happening, be it in Belarus, be it in Sakartvelo, be it in Taiwan. So, I have confidence first and foremost in democracy, and that democracy is the best version of governance that we have, and I hope that the Russians would eventually have that. Not only hope, but work for that, right? So in this regard, it's not that we are speaking specifically about one country or the other, but have confidence in democracy as such, because that's the foundation of what European Union, Euro-Atlantic Community is, and that's it should be at the forefront of our foreign affairs. And also at our domestic affairs, for that matter, because that's where our vulnerabilities are, where the authoritarian countries and Kremlin is trying to jeopardize the election process, referendums, see the mistrust in our institutions and things like that. So I think that that's basically a global fight between authoritarian countries and democracies. And we need to, of course, restore the international institutions and make sure that these international norms are functioning. That requires our determination, political will. But when you asked about where is this chance of democratic Russia coming from, it can only come from inside. And standing for democracy and human rights, it's not interference to the domestic affairs. It's standing for the principle. We are not betting on one person or the other. We are not saying that the future president of Russia should be Karamurza or Navalny or Khodorkovsky. It's not the message. We are standing for free and fair elections and for the Russian society to choose their destiny, whoever that be. Remember, when we had the first presidential elections in Moldova, the Moldovans elected Dodon, a pro-Kremlin guy, and everyone was mad saying well, see, that's but the next time people felt that they have the right to choose, they chose Maya Sandu.
No.
And I think that we should have confidence regarding the process and principles. And that's exactly, again, the point that it's not about one or the other individual or politician or opposition figure. It's about general principles, civil society, human rights defenders, independent media. From our history, it was not only about Professor Landsbergis, right, and scientists. They were playing a major role, obviously, but at the same time, we had Žalgiris playing against the military CSKA, the basketball. We had the environmental initiatives which were fighting the nuclear power plant.
Yeah.
We had Catholic products. We had the rock festivals. We had the jazz music. We had the song festivals. So, and I think that that's the essence, that when the regimes do not know what to attack, what to target, because it's about the entire diversity. And that's the essence of the democracy. So I think that we should be betting on principles rather than one or the other individual, and then the rest will follow. And I think that to end up, that's the beauty of Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, like an example, because, she's not hiding that she, in August 2020, she was just a housewife who stood up for her husband. And, Belarusian regime was saying that for years. Actually, the international community was saying that for years. What's the alternative to Lukashenko? And, Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya's example was there are million alternatives.
Suddenly,
So bet on principles, bet on free and fair elections, because we are declaring that we are standing for that. So let's not only declare, but make that happen and do that.
well, thank you so much. That was a very interesting conversation. Thank you, Vytis. All the best to you in your endeavors, and let's work for free and democratic Belarus and Russia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you for listening to the Escalation podcast. If you liked it, like, share, and subscribe.